Okay, class, welcome to the first lecture here. Well, some basic questions about the nature of man. Before you start to think about motivation, we aren't really even going to talk about motivation per se. We're going to talk about the things that are motivating and that uh, elementally comprise your motivation in life. What gets you going? What gets you floating your boat? What gets you jazzed? What puts you back? What causes you to stumble? Well, here's just some basic questions, and just like many of the things that I'm going to put here on these PowerPoints, these are representative, but they are not exhaustive. These aren't the only dichotomies here. We could sit down, and if we wanted to, we could spend the remainder of this time and the rest of the day figuring out dichotomous, and by dichotomous, I mean this versus that, the polar opposites here. So, just about your fellow man, about your worldview, etc. You see, your worldview, the way you see the world, is going to be a direct reflection of the way you see your fellow man. I mean, do you trust your fellow man? And if so, how far? And if so, how much? And if not, why not? Well, anyway, just some basic questions. I don't want to get into this too much, but these are some points that you might want to think about and include in some of your journal entries. Do you believe there's good and evil in the world? Very basic question. Do you believe in good and evil? Do you think that good exists and that evil exists? And if you agree that, okay, yeah, good exists, evil exists, begs the question, which one dominates in your world? Which one dominates? Are you surrounded by more evil or are you surrounded by more good? Now, that's just that simple question opens up, well, essentially opens up a can of worms because you're going to have to get into some things that aren't easy. There's no pat answers to some of the answers. You may simply say it depends, and I hate that cop out, but sometimes it does depend. Depends upon time and circumstance. The reality that you had about 3 months ago is very different from the reality that you have right now. And that's just 3 months. And you know what? You haven't done anything. You've been sitting at home. So it doesn't take a great deal to change things. Sometimes it takes a great deal of nothing to make things different. And sometimes the changes come from within, and sometimes the changes are imposed upon us too. I'm reminded of Sir Winston Churchill saying, I'm a great fan of learning, but sometimes I'm a bit resistant to being taught. So, anyway, good and evil. Do you believe man is civilized or an anarchist? Do you believe a warrior, a pacifist, bold, fearful, industrious, lazy? All it goes on and on and on and on. And sometimes the dichotomy is what sticks, and oftentimes that just doesn't offer enough options to fully be satisfying. To answer questions. And I was talking to a colleague of mine years ago, and we were just talking about it. And I said, comes down to the basic question: are you predator or you prey? He says that's too few options, Tom. How's this? Are you a fisherman? Are you a fish? Or are you bait? That one will rock your world because, whoa, hold on a second. Which one am I? Anyway, you can go ahead and use that. But these are just some of the basic questions because your worldview, the way you see the world, and the way you allow yourself to relate to the world, and the world to relate to you, is going to be based upon your fundamental understanding and interpretation and identification of the nature of man. Do you believe that man is benevolent and altruistic and giving and caring and socially embedded, or do you believe that man is basically a savage, looking out for his own best interests, every man for himself, and covered with a very, very thin layer of fragile civilization? If it's stripped away, you'd be amazed what people do and would do and can do and do. So, anyway, well, let's get into it. I don't want to get this into just be an esoteric discussion. What is it? Exactly what is motivation? Here's a basic question, too, and this is another one I hope resonates with you. Can someone motivate another person? Can you motivate another person? Uh, well, if so, how could you do that? I guess it's been variously stated in class because I usually have an open discussion about this, and it usually comes down to, well, you can inspire, you can lead by example, you can threaten, you can do, yeah, okay, but is that motivating? Well, I don't know. If you look at the dictionary definition of motivation, it usually alludes to some kind of movement to action, some kind of a behavior. So anyway, can someone motivate another? And if so, how? And if not, why not? And if you say that no, a person cannot motivate another, then frankly, my dear, what the dickens are we doing? What are we doing in this field? People are coming to us for advice, for guidance, for mentorship, for anything, and it, the information that we give them, yes, granted, they can shrug their shoulders and simply turn around and walk away, but I don't know. Can someone motivate another? Hmm, interesting question. Well, again, it comes from your fellow man. And whatever comes out of this, when you start to look at your fellow man, let's just look at that very, very briefly here about your fellow man. Do, do you trust your fellow man? Do you trust him? And if so, how much? Now, if you're typical, most people, they'll say, "Yeah, yeah, I trust you, but you got to prove yourself." Okay, let's take that. I have to prove myself in order for trust to be established, because you got to understand that any relationship that we have, if I'm an exercise physiologist and you're one of my clients or patients, there's got to be trust. Our relationship has to be based upon something substantive. And if we're waiting around and you don't trust me and that I have to prove myself worthy of your trust, okay, how? Give me some clues. Can you just give me a clue as to what arena we're working in, what kind of currency we're working on? In other words, how do I build up a sufficient bank account for you to say, okay, yes, yes, you've accumulated so many trust points. Now I trust you. And more than that, I'm going to try to illustrate absurdity with absurdity. If you're waiting around for me to prove myself, what do we do in the meantime? Where do we proceed? How do we proceed? So you see, some of the things, and some of the things we're going to be talking about this entire semester, are things that you've heard before, to the point at which you, when hearing the question, you simply shrug your shoulders and go, "Oh yeah, well, as far as I can throw you. Oh yeah, sure, but you got to prove yourself." Don't really think things through. It sounds it sounds good until you really try to apply it. So let's talk about this movement to action, this uh, cause of behavior here that passes as motivation. Here, once again, just a list of 8 things. They're representative. They're not exhaustive. We have bribery, intimidation, extortion, inspiration, pity, despair, fear, and pain. Wow, wow, that's a pretty bleak cascade of words here. But you notice something? And there's only one word in there that gives you any kind of a positive spin. Everything else is just horrifying. It speaks to domination and treachery, and uh, well, as a matter of fact, this looks like the dictator or the despot's playbook right here: bribery, intimidation, extortion, pity, despair, fear, and pain. Does pain work? Yeah. Does fear work? Yeah. Question is, and I'm hoping that you can relate this in your journal and perhaps even in discussions. So far, we've been socially distanced and isolated and quarantined because of fear and pain. Well, notice what's happening right now. Fear and pain work. And if you look back into the history books, fear and pain work very, very well for a time. Because then there comes a time when people get sick and tired of being sick and tired, and they ain't going to take it anymore. And when I was in my or in my first master's, pardon me, I did a major paper on a review of Medal of Honor winners, the write-ups of the Congressional Medal of Honor winners. And more often than not, a commonality, a common theme is that they were ordinary people put in extraordinary circumstances to where they just had nothing to lose. And so they just did it. And in a lot of time, in a lot of instances, it cost them their lives. And in other instances, they made it through. But the point is, fear and pain and bribery, intimidation, extortion, all of these things, they they work for a short period of time. But Man was not made to be on 100% alert indefinitely. You can't maintain that. And here, put it in physiological terms for you all. You can't have sympathetic arousal, i.e., flight or fight, indefinitely. You're going to be exhausted. You're going to collapse. Something's going to give. You can't maintain that level of vigilance. So, anyway, these certainly all cause movement to action, but do they constitute motivation? Probably not. Well, let's make this personal, shall we? Instead of getting into all the flighty, airy concepts here, what about you? What floats your boat right now? Have you examined the reasoning behind your pursuit of a degree in kinesiology? What are you doing? The hell are you doing? Why didn't you learn brick masonry? Or why didn't you learn carpentry? Or why didn't you learn something else? Why didn't you get into Russian literature since 1500? Whatever. Why kinesiology? Why exercise physiology? Why exercise science? Well, you got to understand a couple of things. Number one, this didn't happen overnight. And number two, there is a significant delay of gratification associated with this. This is not something that you're going to be rewarded with right away. Now, here in the next semester or two, upcoming semesters, you're probably going to have the cap, the gown, the tassel, and all the robes and the grace and your loved ones and the adoration. But you're not going to get it right away. You're going to get through this class and you're going to get through this semester, which is probably going to be the most unique that you'll ever experience, because hopefully here in fall we're all going to get back to quote normal, whatever the hell that turns out to be, and then we'll be on our way. But you're doing this without an immediate return on your investment. You know that it's going to pay off, but not right now. So a couple of things need to be said. And this is fairly typical, so I'm just going to make this blanket statement. The things, plural, the things that brought you to this degree, and by the way, an aside, how many of you have changed your major? How many? Okay, how many of you changed your major more than once? Uh-huh. Yeah, that's what I figured. Okay. You finally decided upon kinesiology. The things, again, plural, that brought you to that decision are not necessarily the same things that are going to keep you in the program. And the things that brought you to the program and the things that keep you in the program may not be the same things that get you through. And here at the bottom, you're going to hear this out of me time and time and time and time again. Remember, I told you this last week. I could sum this entire. Oh, that's one of my grad assistants there, making themselves known. Pay attention. Pay attention. And I know I can hear the eyeballs rolling into the back of your head. I am paying attention. No, no, respectfully, no, you really haven't. Remember that one of the greatest tragedies of the human condition is leading an unexamined life. Well, start to pay attention. This will have a great deal more importance in the second part of the semester. So I'm just planting that seed so you can look forward to those sorts of things. Okay, well, let's go. And again, what about you? What are you working towards? We're talking all the time about motivation leading to some kind of movement, some kind of movement. Well, that's true. Is it goal orientation? You may be moving, but I ask my patients in my practice all the time. You seem to be moving at a breakneck speed. Where are you going? And they kind of catches them off guard. And I say, well, look, let me ask it a little bit different way. Are you running towards something or are you running away? And after considerable talk back and forth and back and forth, it generally turns out to be kind of a combination of the two. Running away from something is a powerful motivator in its own right, because you're running away from something distasteful. If you want to put it in simple Freudian, you're approaching, you're trying to gain pleasure, and you're running away from pain. Here's another one too, just to shift gears, but again, in challenge mode, I'm challenging you. Do you live on offense or defense? Now that should have meaning to you, because we're all sports people. We're all in sports and into athletics, etc. So, with regard to your worldview and your view of your fellow man, do you lead your life defensively or do you go out on offense? Now, uh, I've had some fabulous conversations that have actually taken the lecture got no further than this. And it was just back and forth throughout the entire class. You get 100 plus people in there with an opinion and a willingness to speak up. Man, that can be very, very entertaining and quite enlightening too. Ultimately, here at the very bottom, don't confuse movement with progress. I'm sure that each of you knows somebody who moves at a frenetic pace. They're moving all the time. They're constantly moving, taking care of things, and yet they're always crashing and burning. They're always running into walls or putting their hands on the same hot stove. And it doesn't make any sense, but after a while, if you pay attention, you begin to see it, and you begin to see it not while it's happening, you begin to predict that it will happen again. So, all right, let's go ahead and get a little pinheady for just a minute, just to put us all on the same page. By the way, have any of you taken the sports psychology course over in the School of Psychology? Yeah. Well, if you have, then you'll know what I'm about to say. Eh, it- the psychology at the undergraduate level is purely theoretical. So what you're learning there is a bunch of flowcharts and theories. That's the way the course is taught. I know because I've taught it several different times in my career here at UCF. Um, I don't necessarily like the way that it's taught and the way it's presented, but that's the way that those psych majors need it, is because they're comparing theories. They're not comparing philosophies, or they're not comparing actual hands-on and what applies and what works and what's functional and what is not. So anyway, when we get into motivation, intrinsic, in other words, comes from within, or extrinsic, a T-shirt, a medal, a trophy, whatever sorts of things. Um, if you, in talking to some of my education major colleagues, they tend to think that intrinsic motivation is the only kind of motivation that counts. I don't necessarily agree with that. Matter of fact, I don't agree with it at all. I tend to think that intrinsic motivation is higher order thinking. Um, the way I see motivation is kind of like a balance beam, like a teeter totter, pro and con, benefit or consequence, those sorts of things. And because of that, no matter what I find that I can throw on the positive side, on the pro side, that upsets the balance and gets me moving towards some kind of action is valuable. And having said that, if a T-shirt that is offered for a 5K run, if that gets you off your backside and gets you to sign up, then so what? Fine. It eventually, hopefully, extrinsic motivation can become intrinsic, because along the way you're going to discover some things about yourself that it's going to be a journey of self-discovery. Um, Difficult goals lead to higher performance, yeah. But there's this concept of distancing that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes here. Don't set unrealistically high goals or expectations. It's one thing to have high goals and high aspirations, but it's far better to perhaps have those as a strategic side of things, and then you set small tactical goals along the way so that you can attain them, and then looking back over your shoulder you have this whole series of successful attainments. So motivation to act depends upon the attractiveness of the outcome. Yeah, and sometimes things change. You're going to find, remember, what brings you doesn't necessarily keep you, and what brings you and what keeps you doesn't necessarily get you through. So, um, some of the most successful athletes that I've seen in my practice keep themselves on task. They list when they see it shift, when they see a perceptible shift in their motivation. That, man, now this has become very, very important. They make a note of it. They write it down so that they're keenly aware of it, and so that they don't get blindsided by themselves. The key here is where to set the bar. People, ask where to set the bar. Well, the answer to that, and I've been asked that for my entire uh, career in psychology and exercise science. The most of the research says the most effective place to set the bar is just out of reach. just out of reach, so that it is motivating you to, you can look at it and say it is possible for, a matter of fact, it's probable that I'll be able to attain that. And you try and you try and you fail and you fail and you fail, and then you get it. Then you're ready to reset the bar. But where do you set it at that point? You don't set it in the stars. You set it again just out of reach. And then you have this successive series of successful outcomes. And you can document this. You can write it down. You can graph it if you really want to. And you can see that this is a very, um, it certainly addresses questions of, or at least feelings of, misplaced feelings of, I'm not getting anywhere. I'm just not getting any better, when you can look back. Matter of fact, I think I told you this is something that I require all of my patients to keep as a journal. If you want to see me professionally, you're going to keep a journal. I'm good, but I'm not good enough to hold up both ends of the log. You got to hold up an end on your side. And I have fired patients for lack of for lack of compliance. Uh, would you bring your journal? Nah, doc. I'm not much of a journal keeper. I just didn't really think it was necessary. Oh, okay. Well, you're fired. How's that? And by the way, you owe me for the for the for the session today for wasting my time. So anyway, self motivation. Ideally, that's where it all is going to come back to, and you're going to see that as a thematic as we progress through not only the goal setting of the first part of the semester, but the self improvement of the second part of the semester. All right. Well, what is motivation? See, most people uh, make the mistake of thinking that motivation is one thing. Um, they believe that one one tenet, one concept is the motivator, when in fact motivation is not a monolith. It's a multifactorial kind of a blanket syndrome, is a number of different things. And here's that balance scale again. You look at the pro and look at the con. Now, for most people, when you look at the pro and the con, most Westerners anyway will concentrate on the pro side, on the benefit side, and they'll try to put as many benefits over there as they possibly can in order to tip the balance. But there's another effective way to do things. You can take a look at the con. You can take a look at the cost side of things and see what you can take off, and the net result will be the same. So you see, I'm very gently getting you to, have you heard the expression, think outside of the box? Well, guys, you're about to. It's multifactorial on the balance scale. We're going to continually come back to that in the first part of the semester so that we can have that frame of reference. And here, it changes relative to circumstance. I guarantee some of the things that were vitally important to you 3 months ago before we quarantined are meaningless right now, or some of the things that you just didn't even consider and didn't think about are vitally important. Again, I really implore you to try to write some of these things down so that you have it clear in your mind. Don't rely upon your memory. Your memory is going to change. The other thing is, I'm just going to project here and give you 10, 20 years here. You're going to be asked. Your kids are going to ask you about it. Your grandkids are going to be asking you about it when you're bouncing them on your knee. Hey, where were you in 2020 when everybody came to a halt, when the whole world shut down? Have an answer for them. Well, anyway, motivation is evolutionary. It changes. It changes relative to chronology, yes, but it also changes relative to maturation, to maturity. And I remember Dr. Judy Ziffer, who was a professor of mine in my first master's, uh, counseling psychology, human development. She asked us a very simple question. She said, define maturity. Define maturity. And wow, phew, okay. Um, Seems simple enough, but then again, you have to understand that here there are 30 graduate students, all psych major, all graduate um, graduate level psychology students, all trying to be licensed psychotherapists. And so we're all trying to be more brilliant than the guy or the gal sitting next to us, which frankly was a little bit of a chore because I was the only male and there were 29 females. So it was kind of an interesting mix there. Um, anyway, one of the ladies stood up and she said, "Yeah, it's when you're 18. That's when you're mature." And she was summarily laughed at. And then she changed it. She said, "Okay, all right, all right. So okay, so when you're 21." And of course, the laughter continued. And we went through all kinds of gyrations on this. The first time you buy something on credit, your first job, your first sexual experience, um, your first something, first time that you go and travel by yourself. Anyway, ultimately, we came down to this: maturation is the ability to delay gratification. Any of you around littles like 2-year-olds, etc. Take a look. You already know this. You could go up to them with a bag of M&Ms and say, "Here, I'll give you a bag of M&Ms right now. Or if we wait until July, I'll give you this box of them. Here." Ooh. Which one are they going to choose? Now, for those of you who are not around 2-year-olds very much, you're probably liable to say, "Oh no, they'll go for the bird in the hand, which is the bag of M&Ms." But no, if you're around 2-year-olds, you know they want them both because there they are right in front of them. I want them both. I want that and that. Give me both. So you just got finished talking about this. Are working towards a degree in kinesiology. You are able to cognitively delay the gratification. You know it's coming, but it ain't going to come real soon. And it ain't going to be necessarily going to be easy. All right, let's talk about some motivators. Um, Here's just some. Again, these are representative. They're not exhaustive. We have money right at the top. I know they say money can't buy happiness, but my wife will be quick to tell you that money sure can buy or rent a couple of grins. Uh, then there's love and profit and power and control and fame and respect and notoriety, FaceTime. That's what we used to call it in the Navy, and revenge, and then dot dot dot. There's countless motivators. Well, question is, what is it that gets you floated? What is it that gets you going? Why do you do many of the things that you do? You can start with just trying to figure out why you got into kinesiology as your major. There are 2,000 different majors here at the university, and this is the one you chose. You decided upon this. So, anyway, let me take that money very briefly because, again, I want you to resist the temptation to shrug your shoulders and just go, "Oh, yeah, money." Well, in my practice, it's my job to pull on threads, loose threads. And I can't afford to make do with accepting money as the answer. Why'd you do it? Well, money. Oh, okay. Shrug shoulders. Go on. No, money's not it. So I'll pull on the thread. What do you mean, money? Dead presidents? What? It doesn't even mean anything. It's pieces of paper. Yeah, but I don't know, if I had some money, I could maybe get a new ride. Oh, so you want a car? Well, no, not necessarily. But if I got a new ride, maybe I could go mobile, man. I can get out of the hood and maybe meet some new people. So you want to meet people? Well, not exactly. But if I had a ride and I met some new people, maybe I could meet a nice girl and maybe you see then dot 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 2.5 kids, picket fence, and everything. Money is a means to an end. It is not an end unto itself. So any one of these, love, profit, power, control, fame, each one of these represents a different series or cascade to the individual. And you just need to be aware of that. And, well, now we come to some of the pitfalls that you're going to have to watch out for. It's not going to be smooth sailing. Um, Goal setting, even though it's relatively simple, getting from A to B, shortest distance between two lines, there are ways that you can get off track. Sometimes you can crash and burn. Sometimes you can make some very bad decisions from the choices that you're afforded. And some people say, "Well, they just made bad choices." No, 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 no. Let's be clear about this. Choices are merely options at your disposal. These are all forks in the road. You make a conscious decision because your life is is dictated by the decisions that you make, not the choices you're afforded. Some people have what's known as a Hobson's choice. This becomes the lesser of two evils, and we've all been there at one time or another. But that's okay. Let's just talk about some of these pitfalls. And this isn't exhaustive. These are merely representative, and give you some example of some of the things that you might want to keep an eye out for. Concept of distancing. Distancing is a peculiar trait, but it's germane and certainly related to many of the problems that we face if you're going to be working with clients or patients. If you're a trainer, you're a physical therapist, you're a doctor, whatever, you've got patients or clients where they are, and then they have this goal of where they want to be. And sometimes where they are relative to where they want to be involves a great distance. Sometimes it can be overwhelming. Sometimes it can be daunting. And oftentimes, sadly, oftentimes it becomes so overwhelming that people throw in the towel and they just don't think that it's, quote, worth it. But distancing. How do you combat distancing? Well, obviously, you break the distance down into smaller pieces. Break it down into chunks. How do you eat an elephant? The old expression, how do you eat an elephant? You eat it one bite at a time. And the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. So I hate to sit here and shower you with platitudes and with little sayings, but they certainly mean something, and it's a reason that they're part of our lexicon. So this concept of distancing, don't let this dissuade you. Break things down. Remember, one day at a time kind of a thing. There I go, sub-referencing another platitude. Sorry. Anyway, cost benefit. Cost benefit. Everything has its costs and has its benefits. It's up to you to determine, and something that you should be familiar with is the scale. On one side of the costs or the cons, and on the other side of the pros or the benefits. And it's up to you to determine which is which and which one outweighs. And again, it's not all or nothing. Don't think in terms of it's got to be over the top. All we need to do, and I'm speaking to you as a physiologist here, and you should be familiar with this relative to your studies in physiology. Most of what happens in the human body doesn't happen in absolutes. It happens in relative terms, and it applies to thresholds. All you need to do, like a graded potential in neuromuscular transfer, boom, it's 0.0 microvolts, 0.07 microvolts to be more precise. But nothing happens. It just becomes a graded potential until it reaches that threshold. And at that point, neuromuscular transmission takes place and action occurs. But you see, it's that way with a great many things. And just to, we'll talk about this in another lecture, but back out here with me for just a second, because this brings up an important point as to one of the reasons that you train. You don't necessarily train to break down muscle fibers and so they'll like build up and get really like strong. That's not it at all. What you're doing is you're training your body's thresholds. In some instances, you're training the threshold down so that more things can happen with the same amount of use of substrate. Or you can get a greater result from the use of the same amount of substrate. So that's the threshold. You either train it up, you train it down, but that's what you're doing. You're training the set points. So anyway, cost benefit. I'm hoping that you're paying attention enough. Well, I haven't really taught you about paying attention, but there's that phrase again that I told you in the very first part of this lecture. Pay attention, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. Process versus product. Interesting discussion here, because we'd like to, even though we live in a product-oriented society, in other words, nobody cares about what you intended to do, we care about the product that you produce. Did you do the job? Did you not? And here it's very consistent with goal setting. Did you make B from A, or did you not? Did you fall short? The truth of the matter and the reality is that we live significantly more time in the process than we do with the product. I'll give you an easy illustration of this. Harken back. You guys are a hell of a lot closer to high school than I am, but harken back. You spent 4 years there, okay? 4 years you spent in high school. What do you remember? I'll wait. What do you remember? Well, you probably don't remember too much. You don't remember, you sort of remember this vague vanilla beige going from class to class and maybe to homeroom and yada yada yada. But you do remember when Jimmy and Billy Joe got into it in the hallway, and you do remember when Jackie pulled the fire alarm and the cops came and everything else, and and then that time when Mrs. Smith was running out to her car and she slipped and busted her butt and everybody laughed. Yeah, those were products, but you notice that those are minority. That's very, very few and far between. But the reason that you remember those, as opposed to the process, which accounts for 98% of the time, is that those small products have an emotional connection. You were either amused, you were devastated, you cried, you were touched. That's the reason you remember them. That's the reason that we ingrain these things. And never mind high school. Take a look at your whole life, guys. What do you remember? You remember the things that had meaning, but not just meaning, they had an emotional connection. Time spent or time wasted. That's the Bruce Lee maxim, is what I always talk about when we get into this particular lecture here. Bruce Lee was an interesting guy. I'm sure that everybody knows Master Lee was a famous martial artist. Enter the Dragon was a film with which he made his original bones. But people don't also understand that he was a very educated man and a voracious reader. Had a degree in philosophy from Southern Cal, and he was a voracious reader, and he was passionate about it. So he got into buying books, and he had books on every philosophy, every school of philosophy in every generation, in every era, from every culture, all over the world. And he studied them and studied them and studied them and tried to understand and see if he could find some commonalities. In this book, Zen of the Martial Arts, Joe Hyams, who was one of his students, along with James Franciscus and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and James Coburn, and Steve McQueen, too, by the way, the king of cool, he mentioned in his book, Zen of the Martial Arts, that when Master Lee got his bones and made his bones with Enter the Dragon, he bought a modest bungalow up in the Hollywood Hills so he could move his wife and family in there. But before he did, he contracted to have shelves put into floor to ceiling shelves put in every single room of the house. Every room, every closet, the bathroom, the kitchen, and the dining room, living room, you name it, every room. Just to house his library of books on philosophy. And Joe Hyams makes the comment that while a lot of people own a lot of books, you could go into any shelf in any room to any book and open it to any page, and Master Lee's handwritten notes would be in the margins. So while a great many people have a great many books, Master Lee had a great many books, and he digested them. And reason I'm telling you all this, I'll get to the punchline here. After all of this study, when he was asked, what is the essence of life? What is the philosophy? What is the meaning of life? He says, well, the only thing that I can tell you is that we have some control over the time that we have. And what we do with it is up to us. We either waste it or we spend it. Now, that seems pretty cut and dry until you realize that the same behavior, the same action, can actually represent either of those two paradigms. It can either be time wasted or time spent. Give you an example, one of his favorite things to do was to sit on the couch with his two sons and watch Bugs Bunny cartoons. And they would sit there and they would play tickle time, and it would be daddy and sons bonding time and everything else. And that was time well spent in the master's eyes. However, if the little boys fell asleep, then he would switch off the TV and go about his business. He would do other things because that would have been time wasted. So you see, he used it as a primary lens, because when people approached him, said, Master Lee, you want to be a part of this? You want to star in this film? You want to appear at this event? Blah, 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 blah. He would use this as his primary yes or no. Is this going to be time spent or time wasted? Let's go to effort. Effort is is synonymous with energy expenditure. That's the way that we see things in physiological terms. Effort is how, matter of fact, when we look at duration, intensity, and frequency, effort really relates specifically to intensity. So, the reason it's a pitfall here, it's not necessarily unless you have effort that is wasted, where you give over and above the amount and actually begin to hurt yourself. The example that always comes to mind with me was something that was very, very popular as a field of study back in the 1980s, and that was burnout. It starts with overtraining, then it goes to staleness, and then it goes to burnout. And this is where people just, instead of recognizing that they were doing too much, they would double and triple and quadruple down. And of course, you can extrapolate on that and come up with the obvious conclusion. This next one, pitfall of being oblivious. Come on, guys, we all have friends of ours. I even have friends of mine who are oblivious. They're just kind of blindly, that they think they've got it all nailed too, but they blindly go and float through life. They never live life on purpose. They never pay attention. They don't notice what goes on around them. They live in a bubble, and the metaphor that I always give is they continually put their hand on a hot stove again and again and again and again and again. And the amazing thing, it's the same damn hot stove. And they insist upon putting their hand on it again, I guess just to see if it's still on. But we all have oblivious friends, and whoo, wow, little thunder boomer there. Don't be one of those guys. Don't be oblivious. Pay attention, and that'll help you help alleviate the signs of being oblivious. Perception, it's in parentheses here. Perception is 9/10 of the law. Don't concern yourself too much with that. We're going to get into it in other lectures here. But just suffice it to say that just because you see something happening and you're interpreting it, don't think that that's really what's going on. That's just all. That's the conclusion that you have come to relative to your limited experience with whatever was similar to that. So just because you see something happening, you immediately go back to your frames of reference behind you. And these are all those frames of reference that you gleaned from your adventures, and hopefully you're paying attention and making connections in your life. And if you have a great many to choose from, then your perception is probably going to be a little bit more valid and reliable than those who have a threadbare, few, scarce frames of reference. And then symbolism over substance. Don't engage in something just because you think this is virtue signaling right here. You're not making a difference. And just because you have a little ribbon on your lapel doesn't make you a good person. That's symbolic. What have you actually done? One of the things that my late father, told me as a psychologist when I went into practice with him, he said, when you're dealing with the human condition, never mind the words, Tommy. View the actions. In other words, never mind what's being said or what's being shown and what's being demonstrated. Watch what they do in life. Watch the movement that they have or the lack thereof. All right, guys. Well, that'll probably do it. And gosh, we'll go on to the next lecture. Hope you enjoyed it.